Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 23rd of August 2025. We're going to be talking geopolitics. We're going to be focusing on the US because there's a lot going on in the White House and Trump, it seems to be all over the shop with regard to Ukraine, and we're going to have to be discussing that. But we're going to start with NATO. Mark Rutte was in Kiev, as we know. I've already reported this, talking about a number of things, not least the security guarantees, saying it's too early to say exactly what the outcome of discussions about deploying the troops will be, but clearly the US will be involved. Clearly, we do not want to repeat the Budapest Memorandum or the Minsk agreements. These security guarantees should be holding, which is exactly what you want to hear. You definitely don't want the Minsk agreements where the Ukrainians were forced into a kind of peace agreement to the Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 post 2014 were forced into these peace agreements that that allies kind of forced their hand to sign, but it was very much to the benefit of Russia. So a lot of talk about that. Key points: Turkey is ready to take responsibility for Ukraine's maritime security, but Ukraine still lacks enough F-16s to guarantee protection. Core principles of the future security system were agreed, while Russia is still trying to block a Zelenskyy-Putin meeting. So on and so forth. Right, that's a context to this. So NATO military chief has said that foreign troop deployment in Ukraine is at minimum premature. So he calls these troop deployment talks embryonic, as you would expect, right? Because you can't do security guarantees until you got peace negotiations. So the main thing needs to be the peace negotiations. But then it's kind of chicken and the egg. Like you need to hit the ground running. So if peace negotiations are sorted out, you can't then go, oh damn, right? How do we do? What are we doing with security guarantees? So you need some idea of how they're going to work and who's going to be providing what. So it's not like you can just put off security guarantee discussion until after peace negotiations are fully sorted out. But anyway, he's talking about the delivery of $33 billion in weapons to Ukraine since January via the new rapid delivery system as being kind of the more important thing to be concerning themselves with. And yeah, definitely, one of the biggest security guarantees, as many people have said, one of the biggest deterrents for a further Russian attack is an insanely strong Ukrainian army. So having their own defense being really, really robust with that support of NATO and allies means that Russia is less likely to want a second bite of the apple. Now, Putin has demanded Ukraine abandons its NATO membership, that it shouldn't deploy, there should be no deployment of Western troops in Ukraine or troops from NATO nations, and they should hand over the Donbass. So that's Reuters reporting like these maximalist intentions, demands from Putin yet again. Russia is ready to freeze a front at current positions in Zaporizhia and Kherson, return part of the occupied territories in Kharkiv, Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk regions, and get a hold of Donbass. So it's a completely, obviously, from Putin's point of view, he's going to demand things that are to the advantage of Russia and stuff that he knows that Ukraine would never agree upon, which is we get the rest of Donetsk, which is a huge amount of Donetsk they do not own still, and a little bit of Luhansk, and then everywhere else gets frozen. Oh, and you get back, by the way, a tiny bit of Sumy, tiny bit of Kharkiv, and like a kilometer of Dnipropetrovsk or whatever. It's like, really? Okay, it's completely one-sided. Then we've had Lavrov come out and claim that Zelenskyy has rejected all of Trump's proposals. Of course, Trump's proposals were the maximalist Russian proposals. So he's framing that quite cleverly here. Really what Lavrov is saying, that Zelenskyy rejected all of Putin's proposals. Yeah, because they're nuts. On Ukraine during the Washington meeting, allegedly refusing to discuss NATO, territorial issues, or lifting the Russian language ban. And of course, all that stuff should come after a ceasefire. It goes back to Trump really reneging on his original position, which is ceasefire, 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 go to Alaska, ceasefire's not important. Ceasefire, schmeasefire. What? And Europe and Ukraine were, of course, saying, no, ceasefire first, then negotiations. We stop fighting, we stop killing each other, then we do negotiations. If we don't have a ceasefire, we don't do negotiations. Of course, Russia, that's anathema to Russia. They want to just continue fighting and then do peace negotiations alongside continuing to fight, drag on the peace negotiations for 2 years. Meanwhile, they've taken the rest of the Donbass. That's kind of their intention. Now, Kristen Welker from NBC, Meet the Press, was interviewing Lavrov the other day, and And he confirmed that no meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin has been planned. He says the agenda is not ready. Of course, they just want to drag this on for as long as possible. Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, has said Putin is afraid of meeting with Zelenskyy. And you've got this dilemma that I talked about in a video the other day, that Putin will not want to meet with Zelenskyy because it means he has to kind of de facto admit the legitimacy of Zelenskyy. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't see the legitimacy of Ukraine as this autonomous sovereign state. And he thinks that Zelenskyy is some kind of Ukraine Nazi, even though he's a Jewish president that's been elected by the people. He just doesn't see him as legitimate. And so, having to do negotiations with him legitimizes both Zelenskyy himself and Ukraine as a whole. And that puts Putin in a bit of a dilemma, because he doesn't want to do that. But then if he doesn't seem to actively want to have peace negotiations, then the US will go, or should go, hard on Russia. So there's a dilemma for Putin there. Now, Julia Davis reports from Russian Media Monitor and the Daily Beast that the propagandists in Russia, such as here Skabieva, meanwhile in Russia, state TV is openly mocking Trump by describing their bombing of a US-owned flex electronics factory as, quote, destroying Western investments. So this is the admission from the propagandists. The reason why I'm repeating this, because I have said this before, is because Trump is challenged on this, or at least it comes up in conversation in a press gaggle. Here, a propagandist is admitting that it's not part of the military-industrial complex. The Flex entity that was destroyed, has been fired there for 3 days, finally put out, but that's 600 people worked there. It was on a night shift. It was a direct attack on a US in commercial industrial concern, right? And this is on the back of the US saying, hey, one of the deterrents is going to be this amazing minerals deal that we're going to sign, extort out of Ukraine, get Ukraine to sign between us, and that will mean that we have these industrial entities operating within Ukraine, and they will act as a deterrent against Russia to attack, because they won't want to attack American entities. And then Russia literally have blown up a massive American factory, and that puts Trump, it shouldn't put him in an uncomfortable position. He's in an uncomfortable position now because he doesn't want to go hard on Russia. He's intuitively pro-Russian. And although I said, wonderful the other day that he said those really tough things against Russia, or at least for Ukraine, like they've been fighting only on defense, not on offense, there is an interpretation of that runs counter to what I was claiming the other day. But here, he should be going hard on Russia, and he doesn't, because that's his dilemma. He doesn't want to go hard on Russia. So when Russia do terrible things, he's left in this awkward situation where he can't condemn them. Remember when Scott Bessent said that US investments in Ukraine would serve as an implicit security guarantee? So that's referencing the minerals deal I was talking about. And of course, this is just empty rhetoric that on the minerals deal being deterrent. Right. On Thursday, Trump wrote on social media that Ukraine cannot defeat Russia because it is mainly defending its own territory, writes War Translated. A White House official has told NBC News that post was meant to signal that Ukraine will likely have to accept a deal largely on Russia's terms. So the interpretation of him writing that, I did that breaking news video on him poking the chest of Putin and likening it to Nixon poking Khrushchev, and then had that thing saying, interesting times ahead, Ukraine should be allowed, it seemed to say Ukraine should be allowed to fight offensively as well as just defensively, that Biden had tied their hands behind the back, they weren't allowed to strike inside Russia. And the prima facie, the obvious interpretation, that should be that he's saying they should be able to strike Russia with these new FP1 and FP5 munitions, and that should be fine, and I'm not going to constrict Ukraine in the same way that Biden did. That's the obvious way to interpret it. But NBC News says after the cross-country round of diplomacy, the path to a truce remains as murky as ever. In a social media post Thursday, Trump wrote that because Ukraine is largely defending its turf, it can't defeat Russia. A White House official speaking on condition of anonymity said the post was meant to signal that Ukraine will need to accept a deal largely on Russia's terms. That's the exact opposite to how I would understand that. Now, if the White House official is being correct here, this is actually goes from being really good news for Ukraine to being really terrible news. And then when you understand what else has gone on in the White House and the communication with Viktor Orban and the Slovakians, then you understand that actually that now ends up being this idea that Ukraine will need to accept a deal largely on Russia's terms, ends up being an actually more plausible explanation of that otherwise very strongly worded pro-Ukrainian tweet. Now, the criticism could be that this is an anonymous White House official speaking on condition of anonymity, so, take it with a pinch of salt. But when you start seeing what took place in the White House last night, it was an absolute, and excuse my French here, it was an absolute shit show. So Trump was wearing a cap, Trump was right about everything, and he proceeded to lie about stuff. Like, he literally lied about statistics and whatnot in egregious ways. You're like, okay, we're living in a just a fake reality, in this alternate reality where you can just lie and facts don't mean anything. And then he puts up a picture of him and freaking Putin, like the sort of thing that you would want to do if you are really endorsing Putin and saying how wonderful he is. And then he was like, yeah, I think Putin should hopefully he can come to the World Cup. You're like, what is going on? And then he just talks absolute garbage with regard to stopping wars. So this is Putin in the White House. This is him regarding that photograph. It is despicable, in my opinion.
So that was very nice that it was sent to me. Okay?
Mr. President, on that subject, have you talked to...
So I think he said, and it cuts off the bit there, I think he said, it was sent to me, I'm going to sign it and send it back. Now, you would only, like, if I was Keir Starmer, right, or Emmanuel Macron, and, well, first of all, Putin wouldn't send me a picture. So the fact he sent that picture to Trump should tell you that he's pulling levers, right? And he succeeded because this is, like, he sends him a picture because he knows that Trump's going to do this. If Macron was sent a picture by Putin, which it would never happen, he'd rip it up and throw it in a bin and wouldn't tell anyone, right? Trump is like, look what Putin, it's just a freaking picture. You could print it off yourself. Look what Putin sent me. Look at this. And he shows a picture to everyone. And it says he's going to sign it and send it back. And this is Putin winning. This is Putin pulling your freaking strings. He sent that to you precisely because he wants you to do that. And you've gone and done it. This is reflexive control. This is the control of Trump that Putin has. He is pulling the strings. And then Trump does this. It's so disgusting. It's disgusting.
So that was very nice that it was sent to me. Okay?
That was very nice it was sent to me. That is, which is Trump saying nice things about Putin, congratulating Putin, condoning what Putin has done, saying how nice it was.
On that subject, have you talked to Vladimir Putin about the fact that yesterday a big US factory was hit in a Russian airstrike in Ukraine? What's your reaction to that?
I told him I'm not happy about it. And I'm not happy about anything having to do with that war. I said I settled 7 wars, and actually, if you think about pre-wars, add 3 more, so it would be 10.
So he's invented his term pre-wars, and he settled 3 of them himself. Like no one else, he settled 7 wars and 3 pre-wars. So in 7 months, Trump has settled 10 wars, which would, I mean, you should get the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But the thing is, he's just talking out of his arse.
I thought this would be in the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty. No, I'm not.
No, you didn't. You said you could solve it in 24 hours. You thought it'd be easy.
Not happy about anything about that war. Nothing. Not happy at all. We'll see what happens. I think over the next 2 weeks, we're going to find out which way it's going to go.
2 weeks. And he says that I know everything about this. I know how it's going to go, blah, blah, blah. He's kind of claiming he's prepared. It's just absolutely ridiculous. A bit more. I wonder if he's got a bit more in this image here.
I thought you'd all like to see it. That's a man named Vladimir Putin, who I believe will be coming, depending on what happens. He may be coming and he may not, depending on what happens. We have a lot of things happening over the next couple of weeks. But I thought it was a nice picture.
He means coming to the World Cup.
Of him. Okay of me, but nice of him. So that was very nice that it was sent to me. Okay.
Honestly, if you were Ukrainian, imagine you're Ukrainian and you've lost some members of your family and you watch Trump doing that in the White House. How do you feel? How do you feel? So I take back everything I said the other day about Trump being he's now getting geared up to be hard on Russia here, even though that's the obvious way to interpret that because that's what those words appear to mean. I think that the interpretation from someone else in the White House that actually this is Ukraine, like signaling Ukraine's going to have to capitulate, somehow you can interpret it in that way, it appears to be pretty plausible because Trump appears to be acquiescing to Putin's reflexive control and fawning over Putin. What a lovely picture of him. Wasn't it nice he sent this picture? He's a freaking war criminal, murderous, megalomaniacal imperialist dictator who kills his political opposition. What a lovely picture of Putin. Isn't that nice he sent me that? You are the weakest, most soulless, clueless piece of shit president that the United States could ever have elected. You are a bad man. You're a sad man. And you're an ignorant man. And standing up in the White House and doing that is platforming the enemy of democracy in the world today. You despicable POS.
If Putin doesn't come to the table for a ceasefire,
I'll see whose fault it is. If there are reasons why, I'll understand that. I know exactly what I'm doing. We're going to see whether or not they have a meeting. That'll be interesting to see. And if they don't, why didn't they have a meeting? Because I told them to have a meeting. But I'll know in 2 weeks what I'm going to do. I have pretty good ideas.
Your Justice Department is saying.
He says, I've got a pretty good idea. I know what I'm going to do. Now, this is where Zelenskyy is potentially being quite clever. Because you listen to that and you're like, right, so he's going to know in 2 weeks whether he's looking for somebody to be at fault for not going to the meeting. So then we have Kristen Welker on NBC News again, speaking to the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Kislista, who says that Zelenskyy is ready to discuss territorial issues directly with Putin. He stressed that while Ukrainian society rejects trading land for peace, Zelenskyy is prepared to start talks from the current front line. Now, you can bet your bottom dollar that Zelenskyy doesn't want to do this, right? And that Zelenskyy is not really prepared to swap territory and start out with the current front line or whatever. But what this is doing, the rationale behind this statement is that Zelenskyy is open to sitting down with Putin and discussing the stuff that you want them to discuss. You want them to give away territory, right? You have the maximalist, Trump, are regurgitating the maximalist demands of Putin. And you're saying Zelenskyy is going to have to give up land. Well, now we have a statement from the Zelenskyy government that Zelenskyy is willing to sit down and talk about exactly that with Putin. There is no coincidence here. So Trump is looking for someone to blame if the meeting doesn't take place. So Zelenskyy is doing everything he can to communicate that he will go to the meeting, that he is the willing person in those two. Right, going back to this the horrific press conference with Infantino from FIFA. So he's a guy that essentially organises the World Cup. He's in charge of FIFA that organises the World Cup, right? So he brings in the Jules Rimet trophy here, or the World Cup trophy, and he because he's not the Jules Rimet anymore, is it? He brings in a big, heavy piece of gold, right? And this is insanely on point, and the timing couldn't be better, because 24 hours before, South Park released a third episode of their new season 27. And every episode so far has been absolutely excoriating of the Trump administration in ways that are so on point and so caustic that they are just must-watches. Now, the most recent one was predominantly on AI, but one of the main themes of the episode was Trump receiving a line of foreign dignitaries coming in and giving him gifts, just sitting down and saying, here's a gift, and by the way, you definitely don't have a small penis. And then the next one coming in, and then they take the gift off him. Then Tim Cook from Apple with a bit of gold. Here's a gift for you, and by the way, you definitely don't have a small penis. And then this goes on, and it's very funny, and it riffs on the theme throughout the whole of the 3 episodes so far that Trump does indeed have a teeny weeny winky, which is all, to do with, I guess, just demeaning someone in general in the most infantile way, but also kind of like you are, what dictator wannabes they're trying to what they're trying to compensate for, and this power grab and all that kind of stuff also can be brought into that. So, and also it's just like the infantile aspect of it means that what they're trying to do is really prompt Trump to get really angry that they've gone down that tack, and then cancel it, and then they can say, you aren't interested in free speech, you've cancelled us, this is censorship. So it's goading. There's a real goading aspect to what the South Park creators are doing here. But in that episode, the kind of lining up of people to give gold and gaudy gifts to Trump is then plays out in perfect timing within 24 hours as Infantino brings in the World Cup.
Only the FIFA presidents of countries, and then those who win can touch it, because it's for winners only. And since you are a winner, of course you can as well touch.
So here's a gift for you, and you are a winner. You're so wonderful. This is just, whether it's a leader of a country, whether it's leader of a tech company like Apple, or whether it's a leader of FIFA, they come in, they bear gifts, and they just fawn over Trump. Now, of course, you can't give that to Trump.
It's pretty heavy. Yeah. It's the winner trophy. The last one who lifted that is Lionel Messi of Argentina. And here it is in the Oval Office in the White House.
Can I keep?
Now, he's just about to say, can I keep it? He literally took the trophy for the Club Winners' Cup, and which is worth $230,000, and took it to the White House. And he stole a Cup Winners' medal. You see him put it in his pocket. Like, literally, you might say, oh, he's just joking here. He's angling to keep the World Cup in the White House.
The White House.
Can I keep it?
For you. Well, you can keep it.
We're not giving it back. That's serious.
It fits well.
It goes very well on the wall right over there. We'll put it right below the angels.
It fits well here, I
That's
think.
beautiful, yeah.
You can keep it until we have to give it to the next winner.
That's fine. That's a beautiful piece of gold, I will say.
Beautiful piece of gold. And of course, he's just obsessed with gold, and he's spending $200 million on a new ballroom, which no doubt have gold. He's covered the White House in gold, gold lame everywhere and whatever, and like literal gold, I believe. And it is just the sort of thing I think a dictator would do if you had a dictator parody such as Sacha Baron Cohen. It's just unbelievable, but that's where we're at now. Zelenskyy is saying Russians are doing everything to prevent the US-Ukraine-Russia meeting from taking place. Ukraine's president called for international sanctions, arguing that partners must help to ensure at least a minimal productive position from the Russian side. So they can't just keep having these ridiculously unrealistic demands, maximalist demands. And then if Ukraine don't agree to them, it's Ukraine who are the bad guys. So, then there must be something productive must come out of these. And it can't just be all on Ukraine to acquiesce to the Russians there. But yeah, that whole meeting in the White House was just thoroughly unsavory and weird. And Trump says all sorts of weird stuff at the moment.
We'll see. We're going to see if Putin and Zelenskyy will be working together. That's like oil and vinegar a little bit. They don't get along too well for obvious reasons, but we'll see. And then we'll see whether or not I would have to be there. I'd rather not. I'd rather have them have a meeting and see how they can do. But in the meantime, they continue to fight and they continue to kill.
Can we just settle on something? We normalise this. Imagine any other president in the world, in history, wearing a cap saying, "I am always right about everything." Like, that's a kind of joke thing you get from some kind of, like, I don't know, you wear it out to some stupid party if you wanted to be like the clown in the room. I'm always right about everything. Yeah, thank you very much. Like, I mean, I used to say as a joke, I was only wrong once is when I thought I made a mistake. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, aren't I funny? But I wouldn't wear a cap as President of the United States to an official meeting in the White House that says, yeah, JP's always right about everything. Hey. He's the bloody president, right? And he's acting like a freaking child or immature. I don't know. This is so unbecoming of the president. So just like, we forget this. We treat him with kid gloves now, and his behaviour has become so normalised that we forget to go, what the hell are you doing?
People, which is very stupid, because they're losing 7,000 people now. I used to tell you 5, now they're losing 7,000 people a day. 7,000 people a week. They're losing, think of that, they're losing 7,000 people on average a week, mostly soldiers. So we want to see if we can stop it. I've stopped 7 wars. I'd like to make this one I thought would have been in the middle of the pack in terms of difficulty, and it's turning out to be the most difficult.
But he called the war between Azerbaijan, he said there was a war between Azerbaijan and Albania, and that's the sort of thing that Biden would have got in trouble with, but for Trump, no one really notices. And, those verbal slip-ups, apparently it's all okay. So now we've got Senator Lindsey Graham in this cyclical manner getting hard on finish that sentence, on Russia again. Senator Lindsey Graham has announced he will push to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is absolutely right. I think that's a really good thing. The reason is the abduction of Ukrainian children. Quote, during the course of the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia has kidnapped over 19,000 Ukrainian children. Actually, this needs to be communicated much more to the American public. I think they need to realize what Ukraine has suffered under the Russian war machine. Stealing children from their home country is a despicable and barbaric act. As I have been saying since earlier this year, I intend to push legislation to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism under US law if they do not return the children. This designation will make doing business with Putin's Russia radioactive for other countries and businesses. So this is a very clever way of, causing trouble for Russia and actually affecting their economy. In his evening address, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy wrote that Russia must be pressured to end the war. Putin understands nothing but force and pressure. So this is good from Graham, but we keep hearing this. It goes in cycles, and his last bill still hasn't been passed, even though we know that 87 senators now support it. So the Reagan caucus, who, obviously, restoring the Reaganite faction of the Republican Party. So the Reagan caucus on Twitter, Republicans here saying 87 senators support the Ukraine aid Russia sanction bill. 87 senators. Trump is wasting his time, our time, and Ukraine's time to negotiate. In the end, it all just helps Putin. So it goes back to, we're back at this situation where Trump is stalling things. Like, if Trump wanted this bill to go through, this bill would have gone through. If Mike Johnson would have proposed something like this, if he thought Trump wanted it. Trump doesn't want it. Now, you've got people like Tom Tillis, who's a senator who has now said he's not going to run again. starting to grow a spine, but only because they know they've got nothing to lose. Everyone else is afraid that they'll be primaried and won't have a job either in the midterm elections in 2026 or in the next senatorial elections for whenever their senator candidacy comes up again. Now, is Putin tapping Trump along is a question for Senator Tom Tillis.
A while ago, President Trump on social media wrote that he was wondering if Putin was tapping him along, meaning stringing this out. Mm-hmm. Is he?
How can anybody objectively look at what's happening now and conclude otherwise? I was like, yeah.
So does the president need to snap out of something?
I'm hyperbolizing, let's say, the ending comments. Okay, look, Mr. President, we'll see you in September. In the meantime, I'm going to kill hundreds more people. I'm going to kidnap and torture others. But we'll get back together after Labor Day. That's what Putin was saying. He is tapping us along. And I hope that people just stand up and recognize he's a liar, he's a thug, he's a murderer, he's a rapist, he needs to go.
A while ago.
Really strong words, but I'd love that to have been verbalized, a lot earlier. And I'd love to hear that from an awful lot of other people who aren't giving up their seats in the next election. So good, but more of that, please. And then we have the other side of the coin, which is the Tucker Carlsons of the world still spouting or platforming despicable positions. Like we just had John Mearsheimer recently talking about how NATO expansionism is what caused the war and blah, blah, blah. And Tucker Carlson's like lapping it up. And here we have just, ugh.
And it started when I read a book by Diana West, who would be good if you interviewed her. And it's this all revisionist history of World War II. And you go, well, why would you want to read that? Well, it turns out I think the story we got about World War II is all wrong, actually.
I think that's right.
And then I read about FDR, and FDR's right-hand man was a Soviet spy.
Certainly was.
Right? And therefore...
Confirmed.
We should have been... One can make the argument we should have sided with Hitler and fought Stalin. Patton said that. So, and maybe there wouldn't have been a Holocaust, right? But Stalin was awful by any metric, and we weren't his ally. The story.
There's so many problems with this. It's like the false dichotomy. It's like you're not either against Stalin or against. You're not either against totalitarian communism or totalitarian fascism, right? You can be against both, and that's the reality of what happened. Is that the US was against a lack of freedom, a lack of democracy. They're against totalitarianism in the form of both fascism and later communism. But this kind of idea that we should have actually sided with Hitler. Maybe Hitler wouldn't have killed all those Jews in the concentration. Yeah, absolute rubbish.
Is that there were a few missing American soldiers at the end of World War II in Russian territory.
No.
15 to 20,000 were missing, and we left them there. And then you read about Pearl Harbor. We all sort of know the Pearl Harbor stories now, what we were told, but I dug into that, and you find out we knew to the morning that Pearl Harbor was going to get attacked. Stalin knew it was going to be attacked. He wanted us to take the Japanese off his flank.
I love the way, I hate the way Tucker Carlson just goes, of course. Rather than saying, I'm not too sure about that. It makes him seem like he's read exactly the same stuff as this guy, and that he's read Diana West's book, and that he knows exactly what he's saying. But actually, he's covering up that he may well not know what he's talking about there. But as soon as the interview goes, of course, you're like, right, we're all singing off the same song sheet, and I know exactly what you know, and what you say is exactly correct. And of course, this is all entirely contestable.
And FDR's right-hand man was okay with that because he was a Soviet spy, right? Then I read about FDR in the Great Depression. You find out that every single penny he spent trying to help the Amity Schley's, the forgotten man, was spent to buy votes. Every last penny. He was a sociopath. And the only thing he could do was lie. He was a compulsive liar. His inner circle had to constantly cover for his life.
Now, there are going to be, of course, big elements of truth that, history is written by the victor, and his we need to look back at our history with a critical eye. which is fascinating that these guys are no doubt the same sort of people. I'm sure Tucker Carlson will be like, yeah, we need to stop funding NPR and PBS, and we need to get PragerU to come in, and where you revise history so it looks like slavery is not as bad as it was, and the Smithsonian Institute museums need to be de-wokeified and blah blah blah. And you're like, so on the one hand, what you're doing, you're happy to revise history. You will revise history in whatever way sorts your agenda, and this is pure revisionism. Now, we should always be critical of the historical claims, and there should always be a constant process as new data comes out of reevaluating our supposed knowledge or historical knowledge. So, yeah, but the idea that the Americans would have been better off supporting the Nazis in World War II is, I'm afraid, unconscionable. Now, I did this video on the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, revoking the security clearances of 37 people who have been involved in Russia analysis. And then they're cutting like 50% of the CIA. There are loads of people from the State Department are going. They're basically getting rid of expertise and knowledge, and they're reforming the institutions such that they're getting rid of basically the cyber and foreign influence departments. And essentially, as I concluded the other day, they're handing the keys of power to Russia. And now it looks like it's going even further. So the head of Naval Special Warfare Command, the naval component of the SOCOM and commander over the Navy SEALs, has been purged. He's been fired. The purge is much deeper. Hegseth also fired the chief of naval reserves and the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Okay, and then we hear another career trashed for not reaching the conclusions the White House wanted, as Hegseth has fired the head of Defense Intelligence Agency, Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz. Wow. So Pentagon fires the Defense Intelligence Agency chief. The move comes weeks after the agency drafted a preliminary report contradicting President Trump's contention that the US strikes had obliterated nuclear sites in Iran. So we had the DNI Tulsi Gabbard getting rid of two people that wrote a report on Venezuela. She said, I want to report on Venezuela. The Venezuelan gangs are being sent over by the Venezuelan government. We need to, Maduro's at fault here, and et cetera, et cetera. And that then gives us emergency powers to be able to send ICE around to pick up anyone that looks Venezuelan, and we can put them in a gulag. And of course, the Venezuelan government weren't doing that, and Trendel Aragua didn't constitute an invasion. So then she got people to write a report on this, and the report concluded exactly opposite to what she had been claiming. So she, instead of adapting her views to the truth, she fired the people that wrote the report. I want a report that supports my agenda. And then this is what's happening here. So yeah, we bombed the crap out of Iran. And it was totally successful. Write a report on that. Oh dear. The report doesn't conclude that. So you fire the people that write the report. So the Pentagon fires the chief of intelligence agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, for contradicting Trump's contention that Iran's nuclear sites have been obliterated. Loyalty to the dear leader is mandatory. Truth is optional. And this is what is going on day after day after day. The US is becoming an autocracy with each passing day. Right. Then we're going to move on to India. So there's this weird situation whereby India is getting singled out almost by the US for continuing to buy hydrocarbons from Russia, and people like Steve Witkoff and Scott Bessent are going hard on India, and even Peter Navarro. And yet there's a contradiction there, and we'll come to that in a second. So to make it crystal clear, India is now siding with Putin, says Null reports, intensifying diplomatic ties and seeking to boost trade. Today, India's foreign minister met Putin in Moscow, so they are getting closer. But some people might disagree with this, saying that the differences between India and China and India and Russia are just too legion, even though they're in BRICS together. But it doesn't have to be getting into bed with each other. This is a move away from the United States, and this is the kind of move that the US would not like to see. Now, President Trump's advisor, as I said, Peter Navarro, has said India doesn't appear to want to recognize its role in the bloodshed. It simply doesn't. It's cozying up to Xi Jinping. It's what it's doing. It's not acting. They don't need the oil. It's a refining profiteering scheme. It's a laundromat for the Kremlin. Now, actually, Peter Navarro is fairly right here. Like, they do take Russian oil at a really discounted price. They refine it. They add the value it to themselves, but they add the value to it themselves, and then they export the refined product back to Europe. Europe buys it and goes, well, it's not Russian oil or not Russian fuel, but the crude oil was Russian, goes through the refining process in India. Now, we'd rather that than buying the refined products from Russia, because Russia then get to add the value to that, and then they reap the rewards. So we'd rather India get the money than Russia, but Russia still does get the money through the supply of the crude. The problem with not allowing Russia to export any crude is that massively affects the global price of crude, because the supply is completely cut off from one of the main suppliers in the world. So you've got to be really careful here. But the US is going hard on India for buying Russian crude here. But then we have the situation whereby Viktor Orban complains that the Druzhba pipeline has been hit by Ukraine and they can't buy oil from Russia, to which Trump replies with a handwritten note saying, Victor, I do not like hearing this. I'm very angry about it. Tell Slovakia, you are my great friend. So on the one hand, they're going hard on India for buying Russian crude. And on the other hand, they are really angry when Hungary and Slovakia stopped from buying Russian crude. This is entirely contradictory. And it shows you the incoherence. This is about loyalty and about power. They don't really care whether people buy Russian oil. Trump doesn't care whether people buy Russian oil. He doesn't care if Russia makes heaps of money. He just wants to be on a winning side. Honestly, if Russia were looking like they were going to lose imminently, which I would argue economically they are, you would see Trump, if Trump knew everything, you would see Trump side with who would be the most likely winner. He still thinks Russia is going to be the winner, which is why he's siding with Russia. He doesn't have a moral compass, Trump. He has a winner's compass and a power compass. And he keeps saying Russia is a much bigger country than Ukraine. He said it a bunch of times in the last few weeks again. And that's his shorthand for Russia cannot lose. They're just a bigger country. They're going to win. Ukraine cannot win. And so therefore we're going to back Russia. Now, attacking India for with secondary sanctions is less about actually buying Russian stuff as a way to add sanctions to India. It's more of an excuse, I would argue, to sanction India, to tariff India. Now, Russia has a big ally in Italy. Even though Giorgia Meloni, I've said this to you many times, Giorgia Meloni is the leader in Italy and the prime minister, and she is in a right-wing coalition whereby her party, or at least she, is very pro-Ukraine. And this was something that surprised some people. Brothers of Italy, I presume, are equally so. But her deputy prime minister is a guy called Matteo Salvini from La Lega party, and he's deeply pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian. And then you've got Silvio Berlusconi, although he's just died recently. His party, he was a personal friend of Putin. His party, Forza Italia, was pro-Russian as well. So you've got Italy in this weird position where there's this division within the coalition. And Matteo Salvini has just come out and said, Italian soldiers in Ukraine, absolutely not. If Emmanuel Macron wants them there, he should go himself. He should put on a helmet, take a rifle and go to Ukraine. So on Thursday, August 21st, the Italian ambassador to France, Emanuele D'Alessandro, was summoned to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Paris after Matteo Salvini, the second in command in the Italian government, made unacceptable remarks about Emmanuel Macron. In recent days, the Italian deputy prime minister has made virulent remarks against the French president president, primarily regarding his stance on supporting Ukraine and European defence. During a speech on Wednesday, August the 20th, he strongly criticised the French president for supporting the deployment of troops to Ukraine. So Matteo Salvini is deeply pro-Russia. According to a diplomatic source who was contacted by France Inter, according to French aid to Ukraine, quote, she was reminded during the meeting that these remarks were contrary to the climate of trust and the historic relationship between the two countries. The source added that these remarks call into question, quote, recent bilateral developments which have highlighted strong convergences between the two countries, particularly with regard to unwavering support for Ukraine. So divisions in Italy there, Matteo Salvini being just an absolute plonker. Now, as US-led efforts to end Russia's war against Ukraine were gaining momentum, Poland, once among Kiev's most vocal backers, was noticeably absent from high-level talks. So if you remember, and Kiev Independent here is right in pointing out that Poland were absent from the talks in the White House, where you had Giorgia Meloni, Mark Rutte, Alexander Stubb from Finland, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, Ursula von der Leyen, and normally you would have had a Polish leader. Analysts are saying that dwindling military stockpiles in Poland and shifting domestic politics have reduced its role, and their overt support for Ukraine might be somewhat challenged by the kind of right-wing populism that is always present in Poland, and the Tusk-led coalition, and then with the recent president being voted in from PIS-backed, the Law and Justice Party, the kind of right-wing, albeit pro-Ukraine, but right-wing populists. There are issues within Poland, and that might be why no Polish leader was seen in the White House. And I'm just going to leave you with this. Tochny have done some work on this. A war translator said Russia is constructing a large-scale signals intelligence hub near Cherniakovsk in Kaliningrad, the exclave in next to the Baltics, less than 100 kilometers from Poland and Lithuania. United 24 media reports. Satellite imagery shows dozens of antennas in circular patterns, making it one of Europe's largest interception complexes. So they are doing some serious building of signals intelligence within Kaliningrad. This is in the heart of Europe, really. The heart of Eastern Europe. Analysts say the facility will allow Moscow to monitor military and civilian communications deep inside NATO territory, including Poland, Lithuania and Germany, and could disrupt alliance command and control in a crisis. Experts note this expansion cements Kaliningrad's role as a central node for Russian electronic warfare and signals Moscow's preparations for long-term confrontation with NATO. And remember, Pete Hegseth, who's firing people left, right and centre, is in charge of the Department of Defence. 3 million people, $1 trillion worth of budget, is a level 4 when he should have been level 10 to come and do that kind of job, but was a Fox News anchor, a weekend anchor, and that's why he got the job. He had never heard of Kaliningrad. In charge of the DOD, and Kaliningrad is like a really serious component of Russia's power within Europe, and therefore the stability of Europe, and therefore the stability of NATO, and in fact American security is dependent to some degree on European security, which is why they've been so involved in Europe since the Second World War. You've got nuclear capabilities in Kaliningrad, and you've got intelligence capabilities, and yet Pete Hegseth had never heard of it. Like, oh, Jesus. There you go. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. I'll speak to you soon.